Welcome, everybody. So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Should be yet another great stream. It's good to be back. Good to be back. Plenty to talk about. So, yeah, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. We're going to have yet another great conversation here tonight. Glad that all of you are here.
The American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome back, everybody. So glad to be back. Yeah, it's been a while since I was able to stream. I think it's been at least a week, maybe not a full week, but I think it was a little over a week. I can't quite remember. When was the last stream? I don't know. It's been a week or so since I was able to stream last, and a lot of great things, rather, I should say a lot of important things have occurred since I was gone, and we'll get into that later. But I'm glad that you all are here. For those of you who may not be familiar with the way we do things here on this channel, first, I give my opening remarks, which is what I'm prepared to say, just kind of the opening message. Then from there, we do the roll call, and we find out who is on the other side of the camera. I call you out as I see you, names and locations. It's always great to see how diverse and interesting our audience is. It's always really, really great. And that doesn't just include folks. We're on 3 different platforms right now. We're on YouTube, we're on Rockfin, and we're on Rumble. And so I try to give a roll call on all the different platforms. And then after that, I just answer questions for the rest of the night. I answer people's super chat questions or their Rumble rant questions or their Rockfin tip questions. So if you got something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, by all means, send it on in, and that's how we do it. I tend to do Rumble rants first. And then after that, I do Rockfin tips. And then after that, I do, YouTube super chats. So if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of our show, just send me a super chat and I will do my best to answer it. So it's really, really great to be back with all of you. I'm going to jump right into my opening remarks, but I'll be keeping track of the questions that come in for the second half of the show. I always have my eye on the chat. I always have my eye. I'm going through the Rockfin, going through the Rumble, going through YouTube that I can see here in the StreamYard platform. That's the way I do it. So, like I said, if there's something you want me to talk about in the second half of the show, just shoot the question in. You'll be on the list. So now my opening remarks. It's great to be back. This YouTube channel hasn't been silent for over a week. I haven't been able to stream for a week, but we've accomplished quite a bit. This was the big week at the United Nations. The UN General Assembly happens every September. It's towards the end of September. That's when, the world leaders speak. And it's the big week of the United Nations General Assembly. This year, I was here covering it, and some really exciting things happened. Now, this is not the first time I've covered the UN General Assembly. I've been working at the United Nations, doing news at the United Nations since 2013. 2013 was the first year I was with Press TV. I was with Press TV a couple more years. 2016, I started working with RT. So I've been covering the UN for a long time, but this year was really, really something special. You're on the list, Dan. This year was really, really something special. And the reason that it was something special was because, the world is in a crisis right now. The war in Ukraine is escalating. And we kind of hit a weird turning point, or it seems like the U.S. Congress doesn't want to roll out the white carpet for Zelensky the way they've done previously. They don't want to give him the $24 billion he's asking for to continue this war, because there is no plan for victory. There's no way that Ukraine will be able to supposedly, to win this war, to drive Russia out of Crimea. Not going to happen. Drive Russia out of Donbass. Not going to happen. Right. And at this point, Ukraine has already lost the war. And Joe Biden and the warmongers, they want to just keep it going as a way to drain Russia financially, drain Russian lives, etc. And it seems like on the Republican side, there's starting to be more opposition to the war in Ukraine, because they now realize that it is completely unwinnable. And this is all an interesting and important development. You'll also notice Joe Biden only spoke for 20 minutes. Usually U.S. leaders will speak for an hour and a half. Joe Biden only spoke for 20 minutes, and he gave the most mild speech you've ever heard, other than mentioning, he spent 2 minutes on Ukraine. That was it. He barely said anything in his speech. He talked about vaccines. He talked about, the World Health Organization. Joe Biden gave a very, very weak speech to the United Nations. The BRICS is rising, and speech after speech from Brazil, from African countries, hailed the BRICS. We're on the winning team. We're on the winning team. And I want you all to know, I have made this point, but maybe I just can't make it enough. Just can't make it enough. This isn't a show. This YouTube channel is not a show. This isn't performance art. This YouTube channel is a vehicle through which I am communicating with you, because I want you to become involved in an organization. I want to recruit you to the new world that is emerging. The sun is setting on the west, and it is rising on the east. And it is setting on the west because the West is infected with the ideology of liberalism. The ideology that says individualism comes before all else, and that there is no real truth, that right and wrong are for suckers, and that everyone is just motivated by their own self-interest. The ideology of liberalism is dying on a global stage. Just like the Roman Empire fell, the Western imperialist system is dying. Meanwhile, something great is emerging around the world. It's not the same communism of the 20th century. It's not classical Marxism-Leninism, but it comes from that tradition. And it would not be possible without the Bolshevik Revolution, without Lenin and Stalin and Mao. But this new world that is emerging, it is humanity breaking free from the shackles of irrationality and the shackles of liberal atomization. It is a new collective vision for humanity, for growth, no longer restrained by the irrationality of the market. It's high-speed trains from China. It's the Russian boom in agriculture, the amazing agricultural explosion. They're producing more wheat than ever before. It is the Belt and Road Initiative. It's the Eurasian Economic Union. It is people being lifted up out of poverty. It is the Islamic Revolution of Iran. It is so many things, so many sections of the human race that are saying we want to grow. We want to embrace each other. We want to love our families, love our neighborhoods, love our cities, love our communities, love our countries. We're not going to see ourselves as atomized individuals anymore. We're not going to live in a society where self-gain is the only thing that human beings are motivated by. We are going to give ourselves to a collective vision. Something very exciting is happening around the world. And the war in Ukraine is Western imperialism trying to stop it. The United States toppled the Ukrainian government in 2014, and they've been turning Ukraine into a hotbed of extremism and fanaticism, and they've been fomenting civil war in Ukraine because they want to stop Russia, because Russia is at the center and an important part of this new world. They're doing the same thing on Taiwan. They're doing the same thing in South Korea. The imperialists are desperate to save their system, and the only way they can save their system is with destruction. And they will fail, because even here in the United States, people do not want liberalism. People are rejecting liberalism. They want a government of action that will fight for working families. They want schools and hospitals, paved roads, mail service that comes on time, a decent educational system. That's what the American people want. They don't want a new war. The world is changing. And I believe that the United States will join the new economy that is emerging. We will have a government here that controls the banks and the factories and the industries and regulates the economy to make sure that growth is no longer held back by the irrationality of greed. I believe that we will, in the United States, have a government that wants peace with the world, that wants win-win cooperation, that is mobilizing the population not to go to war, but to build highways and to build high-speed railway and to build bridges and to educate the young people. I believe we will get that. It's only a matter of time before the United States joins the new alternative economy that's emerging. And that we are winning. And it's an uphill battle. But we are winning. We are winning. It's an uphill battle, and I've had a lot of time to think over this past week. And I've got a lot of thoughts to share with you tonight and tomorrow night and the next night, but I think we'll just start out. I did have an opportunity to speak with two very important individuals. One of them, I asked a question at a press conference. The other was a sit-down, one-on-one exclusive interview. And so I'm going to show you some of that here tonight. All right. The first one I'll show you, this happened on Saturday. And I spoke with Sergey Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, at his press conference. Now, when it comes to the recent attacks on Crimea, there was a U.S. reconnaissance plane that was spotted in the area. And this points to the fact that the USA could have been directly involved, providing data. In addition to that, we now have this promise from Biden to send long-range ATACMS missiles. So at what point does the United States become a partisan of this conflict? At what point does this actually become a direct conflict with the United States, not simply a proxy conflict via Ukraine? When do we define the United States as being involved?
There are legal norms pursuant to which a country is identified as being a direct party to hostilities. And we, and Western countries, are doing everything possible to avoid them, not to mention them. But the fact that they are effectively engaged in hostilities with us, using the Ukrainians as fodder, we see that those who are here present, those who have even the slightest interest in the huge flow of information that and analytical material that is emerging in connection with the Ukrainian situation, they know perfectly well that Americans and the British and many others are engaged in hostilities. They are waging war, first and foremost, through the deliveries of more and more volumes and quantities of weapons. Today, in the statement at the General Assembly, I mentioned the figures about $170 billion at least being invested in Ukraine alone. Against the backdrop, and statistics are also available to follow the promises, volumes, and timelines that the Western country provided to the Africans and other countries requiring assistance, first and foremost in terms of development and to address issues linked to climate change. One can compare this even slightly. There's no comparison. Consider the credits provided to developing countries with the IMF, World Bank, and even the International Association for Development. Ukraine was provided with credits of approximately 700% of its quota. Nobody has ever done this, 700% of the quota. And Ukraine's debt is significant. And they have been allowed not to pay this until 2027. Such concessional and quick decisions are not taken with were never ever taken with respect to any other country. But so on the weaponry, that's clear. Turning to instructors, that's also clear. There are training of instructors in Poland, in Germany, in the United Kingdom. I am certain that there are instructors working in large quantities on Ukrainian soil as well. And of course, there are many mercenaries there, many of whom are official officers, but the status, mercenary status, allows them to avoid a crossing of that legal threshold. But special information on satellites. We read about the statements about Elon Musk and his Starlink company's position, but military satellites are working throughout. Intelligence aircraft are also located and identified in the air, and U.S. reconnaissance planes, U.S. and British reconnaissance planes, are not only helping to identify objectives and targets, but they're showing where our air defenses are working so that next time they could help. So you can call this whatever you want to call this, but they are directly at war with us. We call this a hybrid war, but that doesn't change the reality.
So yeah, that was the Russian foreign minister. And he was basically saying that the reality of the situation is the United States is basically at war with Russia. But they're going as close to that line in terms of legal definition that they can possibly get, right? There have not yet been U.S. troops that shot at Russian troops. Well, there's U.S. airplanes there. There's the USA directing the military there. This is a U.S. war being waged against Russia. Ukraine stopped being a sovereign country in 2014 when its government was overthrown. And this is a very, very serious situation. And it could lead to World War III. And it's very, very, very serious. And I really appreciated having that opportunity to ask the foreign minister of Russia that question. Now, the other person I got to speak to is the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi. I was able to have an exclusive sit-down interview with him. We did it at the United Nations Hotel on Wednesday night, and it was a deeply moving experience. For those of you who don't know, I've spent quite a bit of time in the Islamic Republic of Iran. There's a whole film that I made about my experiences in Iran that you can watch. It's on this YouTube channel. It's called Iranian Dream. But let's watch some. I don't know if I want to show the whole interview on this stream. It's not a long interview because the translators, we had a whole half hour with him, but the translators, had to repeat back everything. And it wasn't as much of a conversation as you might get if we had been speaking the same language. But yeah, I'll show you some of it. But I actually did have a face-to-face sit down with the president. The first time I've ever interviewed a head of state from the developing world having more prominence and importance in international affairs. Do you feel that the United Nations could be restructured in a way that would give more representation to developing countries?
In the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate, I think the UN and its mechanisms I will reiterate that the UN and its mechanisms need to be revised so that it can fulfill its role of enhancing peace, security and justice. And if the UN, the Security Council and the various UN branches are not revised, then I think that with the new centers of power that have emerged in the world, with the global coalitions and the developing countries, the role of the UN will diminish day by day, and it will certainly not be able to fulfill its role as before. And in our view, its position and condition of functioning will inevitably come to naught. We definitely need to reconsider its position, structure and condition of functioning.
Now, Your Excellency, my question to follow up from this is that as Iran has such a vibrant and beautiful history as a civilization, what do you foresee as the future of your country and its role in international affairs being?
Iran has a great past, a civilization, and this culture permeates the heritage of our country and our entire nation with its strong faith and religious beliefs. The rich civilizational past of the Iranian people, on the one hand, and their faith and the way they relate to divine values, on the other hand, has given birth to hope. And this hope will make the future brilliant. Today, this hope has emerged in the life of the Iranian people. The Islamic Republic is now following the path of progress, significant progress, despite the threats and sanctions that Iran's enemies have imposed and continue to impose. Today, with its faith and hope, the Iranian nation has been able to make the enemy falter and retreat. In my opinion, with this faith and hope, with Iran's past and its civilization, we can take confident steps towards growth and prosperity in the future.
Now, Iran is one of the 6 countries that was just invited to join the BRICS. And I'm curious as to why you believe this development occurred and what it is that Iran can offer to the BRICS nations.
Iran is a country with great potential. Iran has an extremely important geopolitical position. First, relations with the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. On the other hand, relations with Central Asia and Central Asian countries. The presence of many neighboring countries gives Iran certain opportunities. In addition to its geopolitical position, Iran has significant domestic potential as an energy and communications hub. Iran as a junction can interconnect the East and the West, the North and the South. Iran is a country with great capabilities and potential, the most important of which, however, are its people, full of faith and determination. Thanks to that, today it has been able to position itself, not only in the region but also in the world, as a leader of resistance against enemies. In fact, over these 40-plus years, the Iranian nation has shown that it can make an impact in the region and in the world. In the new world order that is now emerging, Iran is considered a key player. Iran occupies an important place in the emerging world order because the resistance movement in the region is linked to the name of Iran. Therefore, the potential that Iran possesses on the one hand and the potential that BRICS possesses on the other hand are coming together to form a powerful movement. I believe that the BRICS countries are just as important to Iran as Iran is important to the BRICS countries. This group is being formed to play a role in various fields, both regionally and internationally, especially in the field of trade and economy.
Iran has faced widespread criticism for its stance on the Ukraine conflict, with Kiev and its partners lashing out and criticizing Iran. What would you say to those who look on at this and it appears to be some kind of double standard? What do you have to say on this point?
Look, we are convinced that the war between Ukraine and Russia needs to come to an end as soon as possible. Most decisively, it will be good for all the parties. If we want to understand what had caused this war, it is NATO's desire to expand its influence on more countries and establish its presence and set up military bases not only in Ukraine, but in many other states. Naturally, what we observe now happening is Ukraine seriously increasing its capacities thanks to America and Europe, above all in terms of the military aid it receives. Naturally, this only pushes it to continue the war.
Now you can watch the rest of the interview. It's here on this YouTube channel. It's posted. But yeah, I mean, it was a great week. I did a lot of coverage of the United Nations this year. I basically I covered it for the English language RT broadcast all by myself. You know, I had a cameraman, I had a producer, but there wasn't a team of reporters covering it. There was just me, and I think I did a pretty good job. And we did a number of different packages, and I feel good about the work that we did. And it's given me time to reflect on things. And think about things. You know, I really value all of you that are watching this stream. I really value all of you because we have a very special niche community here. We do, right? What we do here, the concepts that we talk about, the project that we have for building the Center for Political Innovation, what we're doing here is really, really special and important. And it's not for everybody. Let me repeat that. It is not for everybody. There's only a special few that are intellectually strong enough and intelligent enough to understand this stuff and to give yourself to this project and to take it seriously. And it's not for everybody. And that's okay. I don't want it to be for everybody. Because we need to focus on building a network of people that are strong enough for this and are smart enough for this, that can actually get something done. That is what we need to focus on. That's why right before I went to the UN and covered the UN, I was up in Portland, Oregon. Shout out to everyone I saw up in Portland. Because we're getting ready for a huge conference in Portland, Oregon. I'll put it on the screen here. Hold on. We're having a huge conference in Portland, Oregon, December 2nd. And this conference that we're having is very, very important, and not for the reasons that you might think. This conference is extremely important because of the fact that we need to build an anti-war movement, and we urgently need to build an anti-war movement, and we need to find a layer of people in America who are committed to locking arm in arm against the war, no matter what. We need to build a solid core of people who want to stop World War III. Listen to me and listen to me carefully. We must do all that we can to stop World War III. Because if World War III comes, the destruction and death will be massive. And furthermore, if indeed World War III does break out, Russia and China must win, and the United States and its allies must lose. And anything else will be a complete nightmare for humanity. Let me repeat this. If World War III does break out, Russia and China must win, and the United States and its allies must lose. And anything other than that will be a complete disaster for humanity. We do not want this war. We want to do all that we can to prevent this war. This war must be stopped. It must be prevented at all costs. But if it breaks out, there should be no question as to what side we are on. If you want to donate to help the conference, there's the link. Thanks for the reminder, Mariah. We urgently must build an anti-war movement. And nothing on the internet is going to substitute for that. Let me repeat that. Nothing on the internet is going to be a substitute for building a real movement of people. Liberalism is all about atomization. It is about separating people from each other. It is about playing up people's differences. And the only response to liberalism is illiberalism. People working together in an organization in order to achieve a common purpose. We must build a network of people who are committed to stopping the war. We must build the Center for Political Innovation as a dedicated crew of people who are ready to give the whole of their lives to opposing imperialism and to standing for justice. And time is running out. Time is running out. And that brings me to a point that I must make, which is this. Social media is nothing but the most sophisticated mind control operation ever developed in human history. It is an automated mind control system. And we have to view it as such. If I could go dark today, I would. But I can't, because I need to communicate with all of you. I need to do my job as an RT reporter. I need to check in with all of you and have a way of communicating with all of you every night. So I can't go dark. If I could go dark, I would. Social media is toxic and dangerous. There is no question about it, and it's fake. It is fake, fake, fake. It is fake in so many different ways. You have no idea. The amount of Twitter accounts that are not real, the amount of YouTube views and likes that are not real is beyond anything you can imagine. Social media is fake and it is evil. And a huge amount of what goes on social media is designed to control what you think. And if they can't control what you think, they want to control what you do about it. And they want to control who they connect you with. And because social media is so vast, if they can't get you, if they can't control what you think, they can find somebody to dance in front of you who pretends to agree with you and distract you and keep you from doing something. And if they can't do that, they can find somebody who pretends to do something to dance in front of you and make you think you're doing something by watching their streams. Think you're doing something by tweeting out their content. It is an elaborate mind control operation. And we, at this point, because we are the Center for Political Innovation, we have determined that our mission is not on social media. We are trying to build a network of people, an in real life community of people. And we are not concerned with how big that community is. Our goal is not for everybody who agrees with us about Russia and China to join CPI. And that's not our goal. Our goal is not for every person who might vaguely be interested in communism or socialism to join us. No. We only want people who are really willing to really give themselves to this. And it's better to be smaller and real than massive and fake. It's just that simple. It is better to be smaller and real than massive and fake. And a lot of what you see on the internet is fake. And it is our job. We are not rodeo clowns here. We are not rodeo clowns. We're not here to distract you. We're not here to entertain you. I like to give good speeches. I like, to be entertaining. I like whiz bang and flag ceremonies and all that. But at the end of the day, this is not entertainment. This isn't entertainment. This isn't a show. I'm not here to impress you. I am here to recruit you and organize you. And everything that goes on this channel is done for the purpose of organizing you and getting you involved in the movement. And if you don't like that, you're at the wrong place, and I don't care. I'm just telling you. We're at the point where the danger of a new world war is so massive, but the potential for the city building tendency, for the people who believe in growth, the working class, the small business owners, the communities, for the people in this country whose hearts are filled with love and not hate, who haven't been infected with the pessimism that's all around us, the potential for us to really build something is massive. But we have to do it. We have to just do it. We have to just do it. And in order to do it, we have to just recognize that social media isn't real. Social media isn't real, and social media is there to mess with you. It is there to control your mind. It is there to confuse you, to distract you. And we have to recognize that. And I'm going to tell you one thing, right? And I'm going to say this. I am just going to say it. And if you don't want to hear this, if this freaks you out and upsets you, again, I don't care. The filter, any filter that I have has to come off. And I'm just telling you this. I believe, which one is it? Jiu-jitsu or judo? Which one is it? The one where you use your enemy's strength against him. Is that judo or jiu-jitsu? Somebody who knows the martial arts should explain that. Did karate when I was like a kid for a little while, but I don't know my martial arts. But one of those martial arts is using your enemy's strength against you. Judo, someone said. Maybe it's judo. Well, there's one form of jiu-jitsu or judo that you can do right now. And you just got to do it. And I've kind of known this for a while. Sometimes you know something, but then after a while you really know something. And then after a while you really know something. It's almost like there's a picture in your mind that appears and it's fuzzy for a little bit. And then it gets to be more real. And then it gets to be more real. And all of a sudden you're looking at like a total photograph. Well, this is something I've known for a while. I've known this for a while. But now I really know it. I really know it. And the reason we started doing morning messages is because of this. And the reason that we have in real life meetups and we have a weekly, Zoom call every week for the general membership of CPI, and we formed a central committee and all of that is because of this. And this is a vague understanding I had, and now it's becoming more crisp and more real in my mind. It is becoming more real. I'm seeing it more and more. What is one of the most common critiques of social media? One of the most common critiques of social media is that it causes people to live in a bubble. Have you heard this? Social media, you live in a bubble. You only hear people who agree with you. You detach from reality. You live in a bubble. That's one of the most common critiques of social media, is that it makes you live in a bubble. Well, honestly, folks, we need to take that strength of our enemy and use it in our favor. We need to live in a CPI bubble. We need to create our own bubble and go into it. That's the only way that we are going to be able to do what we do. We need to build our bubble and we need to go into that bubble. And if that freaks you out and if you think I'm being crazy, look, I can't tell you what to watch. I can't tell you what to listen to. I can't tell you what to read, but I'm telling you that if you want to be a loyal, dedicated member of this community and you want to be able to withstand all the attacks and persecution that we face, if you want to be able to be one who stands strong in face of the enemy, you need to develop a bubble. Social media is very good at that. And if we're going to stay on social media, we need to actively build a CPI bubble. Cut them out. Cut them out. Maybe that scares you. Maybe you think that I'm sounding authoritarian and demanding. I can't tell you what to do, but I'm just telling you that if you're going to be in this for real, and if you're going to be able to maintain the connection, the deep bond that this community gives people, the purpose and the meaning, you're going to be able to escape the pessimism that's just everywhere seething, you just need to create a bubble for yourself. You need to actively create a bubble for yourself and say, I will retreat into this bubble. I am only going to listen to people that are dedicated to building this project, not going to listen to the people that are hostile, not going to listen to the people, not going to stay connected. You just have to do it. Right? That is going to be the only way we can withstand the coming storm. We have to have a bubble, and the thing is, social media gives you a bubble anyway. And this is like so many of the things. This is just a recurring theme. I see this in politics. I see this in the world, right? The reason you're supposed to be freaked out by me telling you to create a CPI bubble is that you're not supposed to do that. You're just supposed to let Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk decide the bubble for you. Right? I mean, it's whenever they don't get to win by de facto, somehow it's authoritarian or whatever. Right? For example, I've used this example many times, right? In the 90s, Russia was under the control of Western imperialism. It was an impoverished country. The Soviet Union was falling. It was bleeding out economically. Boris Yeltsin was selling the country off to the highest bidder. Bill Clinton was going over there, and they were just raping Russia economically. And what did they say? What do they talk about when they describe Russia in the 90s? Do they describe Russia as Russia being under the domination of the United States? No, they call Russia free. At that point, Russia was free, because when they're in charge, it's freedom. But then when the Russian people, including the Russian government, reasserted their independence, what do they say? Well, now they say it's a dictatorship. Well, it was a dictatorship before, except it was a dictatorship by Bill Clinton. It was a dictatorship by the IMF and the World Bank. But when the Russian people came together and rejected that and asserted control over their own economy, when the forces that rule by de facto couldn't rule anymore, then they had an issue with it. Right? If you're going to be on social media, you're going to be in a bubble. But they want the bubble to be the one that they pick. They want you to think for yourself and follow who they tell you to follow, watch the videos that come up in your streams. That's what they want you to do. And if they can't get you thinking like a mainstream person, which is how they channel most people, they channel most people to just think in mainstream ways. If they can't do that, then they want one of the rodeo clowns. One of these rodeo clowns that they've rolled out, they've pumped up on social media to come out and do a funny dance and tell you not to organize and not join a community and make you feel like you're doing something when you're not. That's what they're trying to do. And they are smart, right? They know that there's going to be a layer of people that won't believe them about Russia, that won't believe them about China or Venezuela or Iran. So for those people, they have some rodeo clowns. And the first layer of rodeo clowns is, well, I'm not even going to name names, but the first layer of rodeo clowns are people that they try to attach to the synthetic left. And that was the first layer, right? The first layer were people that were just desperately trying to keep us attached to the synthetic left. And then people like me were doing our thing and not attaching to the synthetic left and maintaining anti-imperialist stances and all of that. And so then now there's some new rodeo clowns they've rolled out to distract you, to make you feel like you're building something when you're not, and all of that. I'm telling you that they will come up with new rodeo clowns pretty soon, right? If we change the way we operate, pretty soon they'll have another way. There's always going to be something to substitute, to keep you away from doing what needs to be done. They will always have a new way. And until you take control of your life, and until you take control of your mind, and assert your intellectual independence and say, I am deciding that the Center for Political Innovation is where I belong. CPI is where I belong. This is the community. This is where I feel at home. Until you take control and assert yourself, they're always going to have somebody to dance for you and somebody to distract you and someone to lie to you and somebody to confuse you. They're always going to do that. And that's the way these things work. And, you know, you just need to make the conscious choice. And this is the weird thing. You know, people are going to say, oh, this is authoritarian. He's trying to tell his followers to cut up. I'm actually telling you to make a choice and say, I'm not going to follow who Mark Zuckerberg wants me to follow. I'm not going to follow who Elon Musk wants me to follow. I'm not going to follow the mainstream commentators. I'm not even going to follow the hand-picked and carefully controlled alternative commentators. I am committed to this project. I am going to build something real. And because I am going to build something real, I am making the conscious choice. I am deciding for myself. This is a lot like someone deciding they want to lose weight, right? If you just eat whatever, oh, today I feel like eating this, today I feel like eating that, you're not going to lose weight. But when a person gets together and they say, you know what, I am going to plan out my diet and I am going to choose what food I'm going to eat, then they can lose weight, right? If you want to survive in this, you need to learn to replace impulsive action with conscious action. Because if it's impulsive action, it's still controlled. It is still controlled if it's impulsive action. But they get to control it and you don't. But when you replace impulsive action with conscious action, when you say, I'm not going to do whatever I happen to feel like doing at any moment, because I know that there's millions and millions of dollars designed to get me to try and do what somebody wants. You instead say, I am going to make a conscious decision about what is in my self-interest, then you can have control. Impulsive action must be replaced by conscious action. Right? I mean, and there's many examples of this. This is so many areas of life. People who struggle with addiction. This is a similar situation. People that want to exercise more. Everything in life is like this. When you live impulsively, someone else has control. But when you live consciously, you have control. But it's hard. It's hard. And you don't always live up to your own expectations. And that can create guilt. And that can create disappointment. But you know what makes it easier? Other people. When you don't want to let other people down, when you feel an obligation to a community, it gets so much easier to live up to your own conscious standards. That is just a fact, right? If there's nobody in your life, if you're all by yourself, well, the only person you're going to let down is you. But if there's other people in your life, you're on the list. If there's other people in your life who are working with you, who are counting on you, who are helping you, who are there for you when you're down, who cheer for you when you're rising, if your success is the success of others, and your failure is the failures of others, you can advance. But in order to get into that state of mind, you have to make a choice. And I'm telling you, the only way we're going to be able to pull off what we're going to pull off, the only way that the Center for Political Innovation in our community is going to stay together is at this point, we have to make a conscious choice. We have to make a conscious choice. We have to live in our own bubble. We have to decide what our bubble will be and enforce it. That's what we got to do. You know, I have ideas and visions all the time. I hope that someday the Center for Political Innovation will have the resources and materials to have a whole team of people who travel around the country promoting socialism and revolutionary ideology, who knock on doors all over the country, who convene classes in different states and different cities. I would like to build a network of socialist missionaries to go all over this country and meet people who would never go looking for this on the internet and never even consider watching one of these streams. Meet them and show them the beauty that we have. That's what I would like to do. I would like to build a core of people who are able to go around and be full-time organizers. That's very far off. It's not coming anytime soon. That's what we need, right? And we need to build a network of people who understand all of this and are committed to all of this, and a network of people who understand that what makes this valuable is the community. What makes this valuable is the community. Right? Not my comments about international events, not the way I happen to I'm on here and all of that. Someone says they used to be called workers' colleges back in the 1920s. Yep, they used to have the Jefferson School, the Lenin School in New York City. They changed it to the Jefferson School, right? That's what we need. We need a cadre of people that are dedicated to this, that are not reliant on social media. That's what we need. And the morning messages, part of why those morning messages are so important, part of the reason I'm frustrated that they've slowed down a bit. I mean, we got some here, we got some there. They're not coming every day anymore. That can change. We need to get back on getting them every day. Is because that keeps, number one, it keeps people engaged. And number two, very few of them were done by me. Look, we all got to know Sam. Sam, are you still in the chat? You did 5 morning messages. Awesome, right? It was awesome, right? And that's what's amazing about these morning messages, right? And we get to know different members. We get to know John. We get to know Gabby. We get to know different people in the community from these morning messages. Joe, right? So many people, we got to know them through these morning messages. And that's why I'm challenging you right now. If you can make a morning message, please make one and send it my way, because it keeps people engaged. It's not a whole stream they have to watch. It's just something to help people start their day on the right foot. That's what the morning messages are. There's something to help people start their day on the right foot, and it's engaging with our community. It's a device through which our community can be engaging every single day. Right? There's always something to plug you in. There's always something, a way that you can be connected. There's a Zoom call every Saturday. There's these streams happening every night I can. There's a morning message in the morning. We need there to be a way that you can go into the CPI bubble and stay there and be safe, and that we can be there for you. That's what we need. We need a way for this bubble to exist so that we can be there for you. Right? Victory Gin gets it. That's what we need to do. Right? We're not putting on a show here. We're building a network. We're building a community. Now, if you want that, take it. And if you don't want it, sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not here to please everybody. I've been doing this communist work my entire adult life. You're on the list. I'm doing communist work my entire adult life. I've been in different organizations. I've seen successes. I've seen failures. I see what is needed right now. And I have done a pretty damn good job. Right? And anyone who doubts that is delusional. I am sitting down with presidents, with heads of state at the United Nations. I have convened, how many conferences has CPI convened so far? You look at everything that we've accomplished. The list is massive. The list is absolutely massive. But the effort to besmirch my reputation and the reputation of our organization is also massive. And they have gone to great lengths to denigrate what we do. And we just have to buckle down, keep going. That's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. And social media is going to go up and it's going to go down. It's going to go in. It's going to go out. And honestly, I need myself, this is a self-criticism, I need to not care about it. I need to not care about the view counts. I need to not care about the likes and I need to not care about any of it because none of it matters. And they can manipulate it like you wouldn't believe. And I'm watching the activities on some of the videos that have happened this week. Yeah, something ain't right. Let me just put it that way. Something ain't right. And they giveth and they taketh away. And they push this and they pull that. And they don't want us to organize. They don't want us to organize. They don't want us to build this community. They don't want us to build this community and they don't want us to organize. They don't want us caring for each other. They don't want us protecting each other. They don't want us to do what it is that we are doing. And we just have to do it. We just have to do it. We just have to do it. So I guess, that's what I wanted to say to you all tonight for my opening remarks. But one thing I wanted to do, right, is this book, right? So the book that I published in March, right, that I discussed with Kim Iverson, that I've been giving copies of to everyone who comes to our conferences. I mean, this is selling well over 200, almost 300 copies have been sold at this point, right? Sold, distributed, etc. And this book is out there, and this book, it's got a whole lot of the intellectual understanding that we've gotten over the years. I talk about why capitalism is in the crisis it's in, Bonapartism, divisions in the ruling class, the role of revolutionary organizations, the coming triumph of illiberalism. This book, if you want to know what kind of situation we're in as imperialism falls in the United States and where we're at, this is the book you should read. However, I came out with more recently this book. And this book, this book doesn't have as wide of an appeal. And I'll tell you what I was doing with this book, and I've made no bones about it. You get interested in communism in America, right? And you start doing stuff in real life and not on the internet. One of the most visible and active groups is led by this guy. It's led by Bob Avakian, the leader of the Revolutionary Communist Party, the RCP. They are very visible. They do a lot of outreach. If you are in college, they'll come to your campus and try to sell you a newspaper. And politically, they kind of suck, right? They're not anti-imperialist. They don't support any of the existing socialist countries. They're ultra left, ultra Maoists. They denounced China. They've denounced Cuba and North Korea and all the socialist countries. And they're an ultra leftist organization. However, because of the fact that they are very visible, and because of the fact that they do uphold Stalin and Mao as part of their ideological history, many people who go on to become important anti-imperialists and revolutionaries, this is their gateway drug. This is the first group they try. Many, many people, myself included, that was the first group I was around. But it's also, talk to people, anyone who's a communist in the United States who's doing real in real life communist activism. They know the RCP well, and for many people, it is their gateway drug. So I wrote this short book, and it's short. I mean, the text is pretty big, right? Big text, whatever. It's a short book, but I wrote this book because I want to be part of the conversation. I want people who are reading about the Revolutionary Communist Party and reading about Bob Avakian to hear what I have to say and to understand where the Center for Political Innovation differs from the Revolutionary Communist Party in our perspective, why it's important to be anti-imperialist. This book was intended to insert ourselves into the conversation around Bob Avakian. They are going out, they are promoting Bob Avakian, they're out there promoting him, and I want to be part of that conversation. I want every time people Google Bob Avakian, I want people to come across this book. That is my intent. I am trying to hack the algorithm. That is my intent, and it's working. Right now, if you type Bob Avakian into Amazon, this book is the first thing that comes up. And we got to keep it up like that. And that's why I wrote this book. And I knew that if I wrote this book in a way that it was just a hit piece, it was just like, you're wrong, you suck, it wouldn't have any value. It wouldn't teach anybody anything. So I wrote this book. I got the idea to write it when the Revolutionary Communist Party was being canceled, right? I don't know if you saw, but last summer, the RCP was leading all kinds of protests in favor of abortion, and they got canceled. Mainstream media canceled them. The Intercept, Vice News, all these outlets attacked them for being a cult and Stalinists and transphobic and all this stuff, and they got canceled in the press. And that pissed me off, because as much as I'm critical of the RCP, the stuff they were saying about him was just complete bullshit. So I wrote this book as a way to try and insert ourselves into that conversation. But in this book is all about building a movement. And so I'm going to read to you. I'm going to read to you the first sections of this book, because this book is important in a way that this book isn't, right? Now, this book will teach you all the facts and I'll explain to you what's going on. But when it comes to organizing and building a community of resistance and where we can learn from our political opponents, this book is much more important. This is not just a polemic, and you'll see. So I'm going to start reading to you. I'll probably read you the first couple sections of this book. I'm just going to read it to you because I want people to hear it. So here we go. Letter to Bob Avakian by Caleb Maupin. You don't get the respect you deserve. It is so easy to criticize from a distance, to spout off with loud-mouthed oversimplifications, repeat gossip and slander, to mock from a distance, or feign knowledge. These are things that anyone can do to pad their own ego and write somebody off. But what you have done over the course of your 8 decades of life is hard, not easy, and you deserve recognition. I first considered writing this letter in the aftermath of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe versus Wade on June 24th, 2022. At the time, protests in support of abortion, allergies, were being held and organized by your comrade Sansara Taylor. Yahoo News, Vice, The Daily Beast, and The Intercept all decided to pile condemnation onto Sansara's work, despite more or less agreeing with her support for keeping abortion legal. The hit pieces decided to bait Sansara Taylor for being associated with the Revolutionary Communist Party, the organization you have dedicated your life to building. My political orientation toward the Supreme Court's move was completely different from yours and Sansara's. My feeling is that abortion is a trap, a culture war that serves as a barrier to class unity. Even though I disapproved of some of Sansara's tactics and disagreed with her rhetoric, as I read the articles piling condemnation onto you and those who you have worked with, I was filled with disgust. The language was toxic, but predictable. The Intercept quoted so-called experts describing a weird cult, a scam front run by an MLM cult. There were accusations of social justice front groups co-opting social movements. Vice quoted talk of pyramid schemes that prey on social movements. These progressive publications were playing on the ignorance of their audience. Anyone who knows anything about you or your organization knows that what you have been doing in the streets, organizing since long before the woke activists of Generation Z were even born. Decades before Twitter, before Facebook, members of the Revolutionary Communist Party were out in the streets talking about unpopular issues like police brutality and racism. If anything, they are the ones co-opting the very language you and your comrades raised for so long, often in political climates where it was far less trendy and accepted. The barrage of hate and cancel culture directed toward yourself, Sansara Taylor, and the RCP was a total misrepresentation of your years of selfless organizing and heroic sacrifice. They glossed over it all, not interested in the truth, but rather in simply finding a scandal or controversy they could gain social clout for calling out. Canceling Sansara and running your organization's name through the mud was a convenient vehicle for getting some attention, especially when cults are the obsession of Netflix documentaries and the propaganda of the woke liberal order battling Trump. If they'd approached me for comment on the issue, something they would most likely never have done, as I have been canceled for my own work with Russian media and have had my own organization labeled a cult, I would have given them a very different picture of you. If I had been approached as an expert, I would have told them about a young man from Berkeley, California, who grew up in relative luxury as the son of a prominent judge named Sergey Avakian, who even served on the California Supreme Court. I would explain how this young man got involved in activism on his campus, demanding the right of students to organize around off-campus issues like civil rights. I would tell how, amid the historic event called the Free Speech Movement at the University of California, Berkeley, a young man who had just recovered from a devastating illness became a firebrand political organizer, getting arrested, putting his body on the line, and empowering other people to step up. I would point out how the Black Panther Party, a group of African Americans who had organized armed patrols in nearby Oakland, had attracted you as an ally, how you became one of the most outspoken white supporters of this organization of Black revolutionaries, how you led the Peace and Freedom Party, an electoral entity for the radical movements of the time, helping put Black Panthers and opponents of the Vietnam War on the ballot. I would tell how you worked with and wrote for Ramparts magazine, a cutting-edge publication in the Bay Area that gave voice to the anti-war movement and was read across the planet. I would tell how you formed an organization called the Revolutionary Union, recruiting people who were engaged in anti-war activism and anti-racist activism, and teaching them Marxist-Leninist ideology. I would tell them how your organization eventually became the Revolutionary Communist Party in 1975, a group which remains one of the biggest and most visible communist groups in the country. On July 4th, 1976, when the country was celebrating the bicentennial, your organization organized a protest called "We've Carried the Rich for 200 Years, Now Let's Dump Them Off Our Backs." Thousands of people marched in the streets of Philadelphia, and among them were many Vietnam veterans and the photograph of former soldiers in uniform marching behind a banner that said, "We won't fight another rich man's war," is beautiful and iconic. I actually have a picture. I have that picture in the book. That was 1976. For the bicentennial, the RCP organized veterans. Hundreds of veterans marched behind a banner that said, "We won't fight another rich man's war." I would tell them how your organization protested against nuclear escalation with the Soviet Union, with no business as usual protests against Ronald Reagan and his war provocations. I would tell them how Refuse and Resist was established to oppose the rising prison industrial complex and police state during the late 1980s. I would tell how your members played a role in the Los Angeles riots of 1992. Hold on. Got to check on the chats here. Got to check on the chats. Hold on. I see Jamie Turner has a rumble. Got it. All right. I see the Rockfin. Deborah Wilson is in the Rockfin, and so is Lori Lamb. Welcome. Glad you're here. All right. Just keeping my eye on everything. Long before police brutality was a trendy issue, I walked shoulder to shoulder with your disciples in the streets of Cleveland to condemn the killing of Brandon McLeod. Your organization also helped to negotiate a gang truce in Los Angeles in 1992 in the aftermath of the 1992 riots, and they have been trusted as supporters and allies of police brutality victims from around the country. When I first encountered your organization, they were involved in opposing the war in Iraq and rallying to drive out the Bush regime. A crew of 19 and 20-year-olds in Cleveland would come to every anti-war protest with red flags, chanting, "Not my president, not my war. This whole system is rotten to the core." Often chants were followed up with speeches, quoting your writings and venerating your leadership. For decades, you have sat at the helm of an organization that has made a massive contribution to the struggle for justice. You've opposed every ugly war the U.S. government has waged, and you have been key organizers of the anti-war protest movements. You've stood up against the police state and political repression, teaming up with the ACLU to stand for freedom of speech and to oppose surveillance, taking the struggle to the courtrooms. Your organization has taught Marxism and made a point of visibly promoting communism, even as mainstream media and academia celebrated the death of Marxism and the end of history. The Revolutionary Communist Party, though small, still exists. It has bookstores, newspapers, a website, and a visible presence wherever left-wing dissidents are found. Most of the many similar organizations that emerged during the 1970s faded away. The Communist Workers' Party is gone. The October League is gone. The Communist Labor Party is gone. The Marxist-Leninist Party is gone. Both The Guardian and Line of March long ago went out of print. But Bob Avakian and the RCP are still alive and kicking. This is a testament to a unique form of strength and edgy teenagers trying on Marxism as a new outfit and snarking about it on the internet have no idea how difficult it must have been to accomplish this longevity and legacy. You have made great personal sacrifices and endured much persecution for your relentlessness. You've spent many nights in jail. You've been beaten up and injured by police. You've faced serious criminal charges in Washington, D.C. You fled the country and moved to France, fearing for your personal safety and applying for political exile status in 1982. Your choice to give your life to what America considers to be a taboo, forbidden ideology has cost you on a deeply personal level. In your autobiography, you spoke of how you were unable to attend the funerals of either of your parents when they died. Amid the political turmoil of decades past, you had many comrades betray you. Your memoir describes how your spouse was harassed, scathing attacks on your personality, ugly rumors and gossip, all intended to discredit your prowess as a leader, have been circulated. You endured all of this and held your organization together, enabling it to do its important work. The childish responses I often hear from younger communists when your name is mentioned are completely unfair. None of them have made the sacrifices you made. None of them have held a communist group together through the turmoil of decades and decades of political confusion and reaction. None of them have made anywhere near the contribution you have made over the years. Rather than turning up their noses, many people my age and younger should be listening to you. You have a lot to teach us. You have accomplished what many of us could only dream of. You've played an important role in the struggle against imperialism and the struggle for justice in the United States, and you have certainly left your mark on the class struggle in America. I have found that I gain much more insight by noticing the strengths of political figures I may disagree with or be critical of than by simply articulating my differences. And as I have watched you from a distance and studied the history of the communist organizations in the U.S., your name and your organization has come up often. And as I have looked over your organization, both its contemporary shifts and activities, and the historical accounts and primary source materials published on the Marxist Internet Archive, and reflected on my own direct experience of observing your organization in the street, I have gained a particular insight. What makes your work and the organization you have built unique is a certain blend of burning passion one does not find elsewhere. When I encountered your followers promoting a national day of action to drive out the Bush regime, they had an excited momentum. They spoke of the upcoming date of protest around the country as the beginning of the end of the Bush regime, and possibly determining the fate of the country for decades to come. The members were in a frenzy, calling up people to raise money, putting up posters, distributing leaflets, staying up late, waking up early, all building up to a national day of action. They took the dangers of the moment quite seriously, and they sincerely believed that their activism could make a difference. People quit their jobs, skipped class, or even dropped out of school. It was now or never. The fate of humanity was at stake. It was time to go, go, go. I directly observed how your organization has the ability to create a level of collective energy, excitement, passion, almost mania in the build-up to its national actions. The cultivation of this atmosphere, of course, can be directly attributed to you, the man at the top. This ability to create passion and energy enables your organization, despite having views that put them on the fringe of the American political spectrum, to be noticed in mainstream media and to impact the political conversation. Your organization runs advertisements in the New York Times, builds massive events at Riverside Church featuring yourself alongside Cornel West, convenes massive political mobilizations opposing Donald Trump or police brutality. The energy you create around these mobilizations is so strong that many people who are not ready to become communists get caught up in the passion as well. They feel the momentum created by the RCP's latest drive to change the political conversation, and they are attracted to it. The RCP is not a talk shop. It's not a debating society, but it's an organization of action. And this action creates a gravity that pulls people around it consistently. As I remember the atmosphere created around the Drive Out the Bush Regime National Days of Action, I participated in as a college-aged radical. I then look over the history of your organization, and it all makes sense to me. I recall how talking to older communists from different corners of the country described reading your call to support the Richmond oil workers against the Standard Oil Company in The Guardian, and packing up and heading to California. In the atmosphere of 1969, with a political upsurge among college radicals, you called on students to go support the picket line and combine the student movement with the labor movement. An article describing the events reports a large number of students from different groups and backgrounds walking the picket lines, as well as a strategy-level alliance between the local union officials and the leaders of the Revolutionary Union. The article describes how one night a company goon squad beat up a couple of pickets with chains. The next night, a massive mobilization was gathered to wipe out the goon squad. We gathered at the Union Hall, over 100 of us, the workers in their hard hats and the students in campus riot gear. The article criticizes the student radicals for putting themselves in place of the workers, but the account provided of this event is no less inspiring. The article says a typical incident went something like this: 4 or 5 union men plus 15 or 20 students marching in a circle in front of the gate. A company car or truck pulls up and tries to crash the picket line. Several students smash the car's windows with rocks and sticks. After one of these episodes, I heard a middle-aged worker say, "Boy, these students really mean business." Well, of course they did. With your charismatic leadership and brilliance, you inspired them to come to Richmond, California from the East Coast, from the South, and from the Midwest. You pointed out that student radicalism was not enough, and that the involvement of the working class was needed to make a revolution. You created an atmosphere of the time is now, and you brought them into the struggle. Hundreds of young communists went to Richmond to join the picket lines because you called them. You convinced them it needed to be done, and you inspired them to take action. When I read accounts of the founding conventions of the youth activist group you created, the Attica Brigade, I get the same brilliant energy. When I read accounts of May Day 1980 and the mobilizations your organizations called a decade later, the same brilliant energy glows through every word. You're on the list. In January of 1980, your organization put out the call to build May Day brigades. The Revolutionary Communist Party is issuing a call to those who urgently see the need to wake up our broader ranks to volunteer to join the Revolutionary May Day brigades. These brigades will travel to key battle areas, spreading experiences and heightening this fight as a nationwide effort for our class. The storm around May Day will be built mainly through local efforts in industrial and urban centers of this country and in the major cities where workers and others will march on May 1st. May Day will be built in the cities by drawing forward and activating a new revolutionary-minded layer of workers in a way never seen before in this country. These brigades will be traveling for 3 months from right now up to May Day and will occur, striking with lightning force to electrify the scene. Just imagine brigades of fighters from the working class of all nationalities, native and foreign-born, students, and others who enthusiastically see the potential for May Day 1980, converging together on cities and hitting other areas of capitalism's power, challenging their class brothers and sisters to actually march on May 1st in their true revolutionary interests and join the ranks of the international proletariat. Miners from the hills of West Virginia, brigades of auto and steel workers, workers from the garment sweatshops, sweatshops that rot in the shadows of New York skyscrapers. We're calling on workers and others to make sacrifice of leaving home and family to carry the message to distant neighborhoods, factories and mills and unemployment offices, living proof of the strength of our class when we're unleashed, a potential that will burst loose on a grand scale on May Day 1980. Hundreds of people responded to your call and spent months mobilizing for May Day 1980. And your press reported on how your small organization was able to electrify the country with energy. May Day was everywhere. An editorial letter submitted to a Cleveland paper complaining about taxes ended with, "Is it any wonder that those of us with poor-paying jobs are ready to join the May Day Revolutionary Brigade?" It had become a reference point, even in the heart of one of their military training camps, Fort Lewis near Tacoma, Washington. Army brass walked out one morning to find GIs had covered the walls of a life-size Germantown training replica with May Day posters. The same kind of thing was occurring among American GIs stationed in West Germany. Revolution was being discussed and argued on a scale unseen in years. It began to be seized on by the advanced as a realizable alternative. "We won't work that day, will you?" was the idea that captured the imagination of millions, and many were weighing the question seriously. People, especially workers, began to go through soul-searching and intense ideological struggle with themselves. A young worker in a plant where several others in his department were taking up May Day said, "I feel like the man in the poster. I want to step out, but what can one person do?" In just the 3 months leading up to and including May 1st, 800 people were arrested, and over $500,000 was paid in bail. Many were held in jail for weeks as ransom. From the beginning, the hand of the highest authorities could be seen in this onslaught of attacks. Millions were watching and anticipating. Thousands lined the streets, some with homemade red flags, others with eggs and bottles. Riot cops were everywhere. Throughout the day, many radio programs gave updated reports on the battles in the streets. New York, Washington, D.C., Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, Oakland, and Los Angeles, as well as 9 other cities in the country. In Portland, a black worker speaking before the march began looking straight out at the crowd of idiots that had come wearing "Fuck You, Iran" t-shirts and said to them, "This is International Workers' Day. This march isn't going to be stopped by guys like you or by anybody else." An older white worker, a Korean War vet and prisoner of war, jumped into the march in Washington, D.C. Some guys on the corner were talking about stopping you guys. I told them they'd have to go through me first. What I learned in the POW camp and when I came back was that my enemy is right here. I learned that freedom has got to be fought for, and it doesn't come bloodless. A woman in Oakland saw the red flags coming down the street. She remembered this was International Workers' Day, and she grabbed her kid and fought her way through the cop barricades to join up. 2 taxi cabs filled with 8 Latino workers pulled over in downtown Los Angeles and jumped out into the march. Other forces lent their support in the battle. Clergy in Oakland formed a contingent to prevent a police riot. Students from Iran, the Middle East, Ethiopia, and more jumped in. The bourgeoisie claimed that May 1st was insignificant and a lost battle. Their newscasts focused on a carefully constructed portrait of crazed violence. But the news of this so-called insignificant event was carried all day and into the next and ran on the front page of many, many papers. Several weeks later, one of their own DJs opened a radio show saying he had two things to discuss. First, May Day and the RCP, and you already know about that. You heard about it on the 5 o'clock news and the 6 o'clock news and the 10 o'clock and 11 o'clock news. And weeks later, when covering RCP trials in San Francisco, as workers and others sang the Internationale, a news commentator described the day's events as familiar scenes. Clearly, May Day has penetrated into most every nook and cranny of political life in the country. What I observe in your history as a leader is a factor that tells a lot about the history of the communist movement. It makes me think about Anna Louise Strong and her book, The Stalin Era, which describes the atmosphere of construction and optimism that industrialized the Soviet Union with the 5-year plans. It makes me think of Edgar Snow's writings about Mao Zedong and the 8th Route Army. Young Chinese people from across the country left their old lives behind and came to the Red Army camp, adopted a new name and a new identity, and selflessly gave themselves to the battle for creating a new China. It was not uncommon for writers such as Agnes Smedley or William Hinton to compare the atmosphere of Mao's movement in the 1930s China to early Christianity. I think this comparison is probably absolutely correct. But what it points to in contrast to the hard materialism and economic determinism one finds among Marxists. The role of individuals like yourself as charismatic leaders, filled with passion, urging people to be bolder and stronger and more dedicated, to work harder and fight with passion, to live selflessly and give themselves to the future, was a very important aspect of 20th century socialism. Stalin was the first such figure, but the political and economic model he pioneered was adopted in China, in Cuba, Eastern Europe, and Vietnam, and many other corners of the planet. And an almost entirely state-run economy, undergoing rapid industrialization with 5-year plans, collectivized agriculture, and a single ruling ideological party, the role of a highly charismatic leader, incarnating the national project of rising up, is essential. What Khrushchev later denounced as cult of personality has a spiritual quality. It was an essential part of the mobilizations to raise countries up from poverty under the leadership of Marxist-Leninist parties. Many countries around the world were transformed by an economic model of development that relied on a figure who had the ability to pull out the best from people and empower them to do amazing things. This is an aspect of 20th century really existing socialism that is unacknowledged in Marxist economic textbooks. You applied it to building and leading your small political sect in the United States. You learned the method of motivating people to build, bonding people together with a common mission, and creating an atmosphere of anticipation for an upcoming National Day of Action. This method you developed held your organization together decade after decade and gave it the strength to force itself to be acknowledged and relevant in political discourse, as small and fringe as it may be. You have been attacked for allegedly stating that you sought to build a cult of personality around yourself. Those who level this attack against you failed to realize that to whatever degree you achieved this, it has a lot to do with the success and endurance of your organization over the years. Many people attached themselves to your teachings and your political mission and gained validation for themselves by putting it into practice. Other organizations that failed to create the same kind of passionate, emotional, and dedicated atmosphere have faded away. The Revolutionary Communist Party remains. The ideology of liberalism glorifies the individual above all else. It celebrates thinking for yourself and views any kind of group cohesion or collectivism with contempt. Communists and socialists in America are largely infected with this kind of thinking. For them, socialism is a way to be edgy, to rebel, and to define themselves in opposition to the anti-communist society that they live in. However, I attribute the limited success of your organization and your organization's survival over the years, as other communist organizations has collapsed, largely to your illiberalism. To some degree or other, your organization mimics the non-liberal and non-individualistic thinking of foreign communist movements it takes inspiration from. I do not think there is something fundamentally wrong with presenting yourself as the leader of the revolution. I do not think there's anything fundamentally wrong with your organization seeking to build a culture of appreciation for your teachings and work. I may have criticism of how you have done this and how it has been carried out, and I certainly have massive criticism of your work and of your perspective. But the liberal disgust for charismatic leadership and group mobilization is a toxic aspect of decaying Western culture. Human beings are naturally collective creatures. Since the dawn of time, they have organized themselves into groups, and these groups have almost always had an individual who plays the executive role. Every country has a head of state. Every corporation has a CEO. Every workplace has a manager. Every classroom has a teacher. I reject the notion that leaders are bad, or that idealizing a political thinker or a philosopher or having a charismatic individual as the face of a political movement is somehow dangerous authoritarianism. This is a brain worm, a mind infection planted by liberals during the Cold War and leading to so much utter demoralization in our time. Sure, as communists, we seek an egalitarian society without a state, without coercion. We seek to dismantle all social hierarchies in the long term. But I can imagine that even in the ideal communist world, some kind of leadership will exist as non-coercive, voluntary, and egalitarian as it may be. In my experience, even the most free-thinking and cynical people have a celebrity, a public figure, or an artist that they idealize, even if privately. The liberal opposition to the very concept of hero worship runs contrary to the way human societies function. In an entity that has effectively carried out many political operations over the years and remained intact despite the climate dramatically changing, you played an essential role. You, as the man at the top, the leader, the public face, are like the CEO at an effective startup company. Perhaps one can think of how Napoleon's detractors called him the 100,000 man, because with his energy and passion, he propelled a massive army. The task you took on for yourself was attempted by many would-be chairmen and aspiring American Lenins among the baby boomer generation. Most of them gave up a decade at most. Names like Mike Klonsky, Michael Lasky, Jerry Tung, Marlene Dixon, and Clayton Van Lydegraf have faded from most people's memories. They were unable to accomplish anything near what you have done in the last 50 years. Despite all the mud thrown at you and all the posturing and petty criticism directed at you, you've had far more success at carrying out this highly difficult task. And perhaps by your own standards, none of this matters. Your organization fixates on the slogan, revolution, nothing less. But I think short of seizing power in a revolution, you have indeed accomplished a lot. Your organization is one of the main reasons that Mumia Abu-Jamal is still alive and breathing. Your organization got flag burning legalized by the U.S. Supreme Court and stimulated years of debate about compulsory patriotism and freedom of speech. Your organization built huge protests calling out ugly wars U.S. imperialism has waged. I've seen with my own eyes that your organization gave critical support to surviving family members of those murdered by the police and supported them consistently for decades. None of this is irrelevant. None of this can be discounted And none of it would be possible if you, as the man at the top, the lightning rod of personal attacks and threats of repression, did not indeed possess serious skills as a leader and motivator of your comrades. Marxism as an ideology places itself solidly in the camp of the materialists against idealism, a debate that goes back to ancient Greek philosophers. Does the mind create reality, or does reality create the mind? The idealist Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." The dialectical materialist Friedrich Engels said, "Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks." Marx's materialism was unlike that of previous materialist philosophers in that he not only argued that matter was all that existed and rejected the existence of any spiritual plane or supernatural energy. Marx argued that the matter that existed was dialectical and in a constant state of conflict and change. This view of the world as being nothing but solid existence, but this solid existence never being static and constantly evolving due to clashes and contradictions, is called dialectical materialism. I admit that despite considering Marxism-Leninism and the global communist movement to be a big part of my ideological heritage, I have broken with a purely dialectical materialist worldview. I believe in the existence of God, though not in the same sense as others. I also believe in the power of ideas, the power of human will, the power of love and intention in altering the nature of reality. I admit I am not a pure materialist, but I would argue that neither are you. I see idealism not merely in the manner in which you mobilize your followers to selflessly devote themselves to the political mobilizations. I see idealism in many of your stated beliefs and writings. For an organization that presents itself as Marxist and specifically emphasizes atheism, I see very little interest in economics. Marx's understanding of the irrationality of capitalism is highly relevant in our time. Labor is being replaced by machines at a level previously unheard of with artificial intelligence. Marx's concept about the workers' competition with the machines, the tendency of the falling rate of profit, the problem of overproduction are all highly important and need to be widely understood. The built-in problems of a system where human beings' only value is their ability to create surplus value for an employer, a system where the means of production only function in order to maximize profits for their owner, are back with a vengeance. Yet, in the publications of the Revolutionary Communist Party and in your writings, I do not find articles bemoaning poverty amid plenty, explaining the root of the economic crisis and the tech revolution, or calling for the working class to mobilize in its own economic interests in order to seize the means of production. Instead, I hear condemnations of Republicans as being racist or fascist. I hear endless talk of achieving a world without oppression, poverty, and destruction of the environment, and a whole different way to organize society. A whole better world is possible. The economic problems of capitalism are not bemoaned, and the vision of socialism that is put forward is not one where the fundamental irrationality of production for profit is eliminated. When I open the pages of Basics or listen to the speeches such as Revolution, Nothing Less, or Revolution, Why It's Possible, Why It's Necessary, What It's All About, I hear articulated the ugly history of lynching and Jim Crow segregation. I hear articulated outrage about police brutality and the violent nature of the U.S. state. I find crass rejection and lampooning of the jingoism and patriotism that was much more common in U.S. society. And all of this is admirable and correct, but it is also something that any MSNBC liberal or woke social media personality could say as well. You must admit that your proclamation that there wouldn't be a U.S. imperialism in the way it was today if it weren't for the exploitation of black people under slavery, and your call on the people to conceive of a world without America, without everything America stands for and what it does in the world, could have been written by the 1619 Project of the New York Times. In the age of woke politics, there's no longer anything edgy or radical about saying you're triggered by the American flag or condemning police brutality and rhetoric laced with profanity. It is good that police brutality and racial inequality are acknowledged in ways they haven't been before. However, white guilt radicalism and campus SJW virtue signaling are everywhere in U.S. society these days, and much of it has very little to do with anything that Karl Marx ever wrote. Though you allude to class relations and empowering the masses of people, a new economic system, your rhetoric sounds very similar to that of modern-day woke moralists. Your critique of U.S. society seems to be that there are bad people who are selfish, racist, chauvinistic, and cruel who run the state. And your solution, laid out in your Constitution for a new socialist America, calls on your audience to imagine a new society, emphasizing solving this problem by taking power and putting moral people in their place to rule according to a more ethical and rational worldview. This is idealism, not materialism. The current order is directed by bad ideas, racism, sexism, and religious superstition, and it is to be resolved by imposing good ideas, anti-racism, science, atheism. This misses the very essence of everything that Marx wrote about. Marx did not speak of good people with good ideas, battling bad people with bad ideas. He spoke of economic classes struggling for power out of material interest, pushing humanity to advance toward higher modes of production. And that's where I'll stop. That's the first 3.5 chapters of Letter to Bob Avakian. I wrote it for a reason, because we're building an organization here, and, read it. I take him to task. I explain why Russia and China are not imperialist. I critique his atheism and argue, against it. And I do a lot in the book. So I hope you all enjoyed that. And I see that Jamie Turner sent in a Rumble rant. So I got that. So yeah. All right. So why don't we do the roll call now? Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. I'll call you all out as I see you. And then from there, we'll start answering people's super chat questions. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Who's with us? We got Tyler in Missouri. Shout out to you, Tyler. Hope you're doing well. He's a teacher, so he's back at school. September. Rice from Adelaide, Australia is with us. Very, very good. All righty. Who else is with us tonight? Tatiana in Fort Worth. Dustin Schlesinger in Cleveland. Carter in Duluth. Gaia in Texas. Welcome, Gala in Texas. Sorry. Welcome, Gala. Jenny Lynn in Cincinnati. JT24 in Mississippi. Neil Frazier in Hong Kong. Welcome. Patch in Arizona. Victory Gin in New Mexico. Gabby in Chicago. Mariah in North Carolina. Ian in Chester, England. Bob Troy in New York. Naomi Gato from Kanagawa, Japan. John Whitty in Houston. Bob Troy, Ian Chester in England. Bob Troy in New York. Sam from Missouri. John Whitty in Houston. Ottawa, Ontario, work in progress. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. So glad you're here. Steve and Ann in Rheingold, Georgia. Mohsen from Iran. Welcome, Mohsen. St. David's, Bermuda. Truth Teller in Canada. Welcome, everybody. My voice is given out. It's deeper than it usually is, which is good, but it's given out. So I guess I'll just have to keep drinking water and try to get through this. It's been a busy week, Saturday I worked at the UN, covered Lavrov, and I've been going all week, and now I'm happy to be back. I'll be doing this a lot. So might be a big podcast tomorrow, but it's not clear. A lot is up in the air. A lot of great things are happening. It looks like I'll be streaming with Angela, the head of the Libertarian Party. It looks like I'll be streaming with her in a couple weeks. We have a date set again. We had to call off last time, but looks like we're rescheduled for that. Temple City, California, welcome. Canada, Gonzalo from Argentina, Alex from Brazil. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad that you all are watching. Anybody else? Names and locations. Names and locations. I see on Rumble, we got a few people. Victory Gin, Lori Lamb, Deborah Wilson. Auckland, New Zealand, Kiwi Corner. Jamie Turner from Boise, Idaho. They're on the Rumble. So, yeah, names and locations. Anybody else? Names and locations. I'll call you out as I see you, and then I'll start answering people's questions. I would love to engage with people. All right. Well, I'm going to start answering people's questions. So we'll do the Rumble rants first. These are the questions that came in on the Rumble. What is happening in the Caucasus? Are the imperialist forces trying to destabilize the region? Look, are the imperialist forces trying to destabilize the region? Yes. Yes, they are. All right. Go and read The Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski. All right. It's all about keeping the people on the Eurasian hemisphere fighting with each other. That is their strategy. You know, Armenia and Azerbaijan, there is a territorial dispute. However, Armenia has agreed that that territory belongs to Azerbaijan. Russia is obligated under the treaties that exist to send peacekeeping forces there. And my belief is that, yes, while they're, and all over the, there's disputed territory, with Georgia, there's a lot of disputed territories since the fall of the Soviet Union. You have to remember, these folks have been living with each other for thousands of years, right? Now, the Native Americans lived in the United States for thousands of years, but then 300 or 400 years ago, my ancestors and your ancestors showed up and, took it from them. And we've only been living here in the United States for the past couple hundred years. Well, in Eurasia, in Central Asia, in Eastern Europe, those folks have been living with each other for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. The amount of ethnic rivalry that exists there and histories of different ethnicities in Asia or in Eastern Europe is massive, right? The amount of religious differences that exist is also massive. There's been many empires that have risen and fallen, and you just have to keep that in mind. So, in that context, the United States and its allies, especially since Russia and China have reemerged and gotten stronger in the 21st century, has been to heighten these differences, and that's what they want to do. They want to heighten these differences. And, Russia has committed itself to regional stability. So that's what's going on there. All right. Next, thoughts on the Ukrainian soldier who fought the Russians during the Second World War. That, at this point, this has happened so many times, but it's like getting blatant. If he fought the Russians during the Second World War, what side was he on? If people can't see that, I saw that video of them applauding in the Ukrainian parliament. If people can't see that that's a Nazi, I mean, it's like willful ignorance, right? Everybody's a Nazi, according to the liberals. Everybody's a Nazi, right? There's a secret Nazi conspiracy. It's going to take over the government. Trump was a Nazi because of January 6th. I'm a Nazi because I met with Dugin, who's not a Nazi. Everyone's a Nazi except actual Nazis. I mean, it is bizarre. And it's like these liberal folks, the Democratic Party Biden apologists, they just refuse to acknowledge what's right in front of their eyes, right? I mean, they're so desperate for everybody to be a Nazi, but now you've got an actual Nazi being honored in the Canadian Parliament by Zelensky, who's getting millions of our tax dollars, and they blink an eye. It's frustrating. And that's why we need in real life people out there to confront people with this reality and make them aware of it. right? People need to be shown that this is what's happening because social media isn't going to do it. We need a team of people to be out in the streets, engaging people, and we need to build up a visible anti-war presence in America. And that is what the very important rally coming up December 2nd, that's what this is about. That is what this is about. Right? We need to build this event. We need to show the world that there is indeed a massive anti-war layer of U.S. society. We need to do this event. And there's no substitute for it, right? And we need all the support we can get. We need to build this event. Now is the time to make your travel plans, reserve your plane tickets. Now is the time to send a donation to help us do it. Right? I was just out in Portland for a great movie showing, and now is the time. Make your arrangements. We're going to have buses from Seattle, right? We're going to have buses from Seattle. We're going to have buses from California. We're going to have people from the Libertarian Party. We're going to have people from the Party of Communists. We're going to have people from different organizations. Now is the time. Now is the time. Right? We have to build an anti-war movement. December 2nd in Portland, we're going to have a mega indoor all-day anti-imperialist rally. We need you there. We need you to come up beforehand and help us build it. We need you to donate to help it happen. This is something you can do. If you want to make a difference, you can do it. Looks like Scott Ritter is coming. Jyoti Brar from the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, is coming. Nick Brana is coming. We need you there. We need you there. Need you to come to Portland. If you're wondering when to take off work, December 2nd, be there. All right. I got another Rumble rant. Thoughts on the Trudeau and India situation. What is that? Right? I don't know what that is. What's the Trudeau and India situation? What is that? Trudeau is the leader of Canada. Is he disrespected India? Is that what's going on? I don't know what's going on there. Thoughts on, I already did that one, right? And then there's another one. Many outdoorsy and environmental type people have trickled into supporting degrowth, but they mean good in their hearts. How do we convince them? Well, we have to show them that the problem isn't growth. The problem is irrational growth. The problem is that people are growing in a way that is not sustainable, and that we need strategic growth, but that growth is not bad. We need to get something higher than fossil fuels. The degrowth stuff is about recruiting people to a mindset. It's not about recruiting people to be aware of environmental problems. It's not about recruiting people to be more environmentally conscious. The degrowth stuff is about recruiting people to a mindset. It's about recruiting people to be depressed. It's about recruiting people to be hopeless. It's about recruiting people to not believe that there's a better future. It's about recruiting people to anti-humanism. And that is why it must be fought at all costs. And they play these games, the degrowthers play these games, where the definition of degrowth constantly moves. First it means this, then it means this, then it means this, and it's the same with land back. Right? Decolonization, it's this game where you have to agree with them. But the second you start arguing with them about what it means, the goalpost moves. You have to say to them, no, I'm not going to let you play this game about what degrowth means or doesn't mean. Is growth good or bad? Growth is good, but it needs to be done strategically so you can continue growing, right? If you cut down the whole forest, you might grow for a day, but then there's no trees left. So obviously, that's not long-term growth. The problem isn't growth. The problem is you didn't grow strategically. And we just have to fight them. Don't let them play the game, because they always say, oh, well, degrowth doesn't mean this. It means blah, 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 or it means blah, blah. It's all bullshit. They're just moving the goalpost, and every argument, the definition of what degrowth means changes. We don't care about the definition. We care about, is growth bad, or is humanity a cancer on Mother Earth that needs to be exterminated? Is human life good or bad? Is building and constructing and marching toward a better future something we should do or not? That's all I care about. And that's all that they really care about either, or they wouldn't argue with us. They say, well, degrowth doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean that. Well, then why are you so mad when I oppose it, right? If I just have a different definition of it. And why are you calling it degrowth if it's not really degrowth? If you're not saying that growth is bad, why are you calling it degrowth, right? It is degrowth. It's anti-consumerism, anti-consumption, Malthusianism, overpopulation. That's what it is. But they change the definition. They have different models about what it means. There's a million books about proposing different degrowth models. But at the end of the day, the essence of it is that we need to drive down living standards, reduce consumption. I mean, like one argument, someone said, well, degrowth isn't bad. It just means working from home. We're already doing that. And that's actually growth. Working from home is growth because we've developed the technology so we don't have to travel to work. That's not degrowth, right? That's growth. The fact that I'm able to talk to you through this computer screen, I don't have to be broadcast over radio waves. That's growth. That's human technology. That's advancement. So degrowth is not working from home. But whenever you argue with one of these people, the definition always changes. So they say, well, what's wrong with working from home? Working from home is not degrowth. It's actually growth. It means with human innovation and technology, we've advanced to the point that we don't need to get in our cars and drive our ass to work every day. That's growth. That's advancement, you idiot. 50 years ago, people couldn't work from home the same way they do now. But because of human growth, we have worked from home. Right? I mean, that's ridiculous. Right? And that they have a million little games they like to play. Being more strategic in how you use resources is not degrowth. The idea that growth is bad, that expanding the human population is bad, that expanding the life expectancy is bad, that consumption is bad, living standards must go down, that's degrowth. You're on the list, Gabby. That's degrowth. All right. Very good. Okay, so I've done the Rumble rants, and so now we'll start doing the Super Chat questions, because I don't see anything on the Rockfin. So we got 10 Super Chats to get through. Dead Kennedys holiday in Cambodia about Pol Pot. What does this mean? The Dead Kennedys were a rock band from the 1980s, right? They were a British, were they British, or they were a punk rock band? I know the Dead Kennedys. And they went on holiday to Cambodia, and when Pol Pot was in power, when it was called I don't know, is that an album that they released? Somebody tell me I'm missing something here in Dan's question. I am missing something in Dan's question. What is he talking about? The Dead Kennedys, the rock band, holiday in Cambodia about Pol Pot. Pol Pot was a leader of Cambodia after the Vietnam War. He called it Democratic Kampuchea and Year Zero. And we now know he was being supported by the U.S. imperialists and the CIA, to fight against the pro-Soviet communists in Vietnam. He believed he was a degrowther. He was against economic growth. He said that Democratic Kampuchea, his country, could have communism on the basis of an agrarian economy. They didn't need industrialization. So yeah, Cambodia, that was degrowth in action, anti-industrialism, and it was being supported by U.S. imperialism and the CIA. So, and it was awful. It was an awful regime. If you want a good resource on it, I often point people toward a very good communist critique of Pol Pot that I have read. I recommend it to people if I can find it. It's on my shelf here. It's called The Revolution Rescued by Erwin Silber. Do I have it? Is it here? Yes, it is. This is the book I recommend on Pol Pot. The Revolution Rescued, Kampuchea by Erwin Silber. This was put out by Maoists, actually, because China was supporting Pol Pot, and the folks who, it's from Line of March Publications, which was, the October League and, like the Guardian Clubs. It was like a Maoist group. And they studied Pol Pot, and they ultimately came to the conclusion that Vietnam was right to remove Pol Pot from power. And they wrote The Revolution Rescued. And this book is full of great information about how Pol Pot was backed by the U.S. imperialists, how Pol Pot was having disastrous policies in Cambodia, etc. So I'm not a fan of Pol Pot, and it's infuriating that they invoke Pol Pot in their anti-communism all the time. When they're bashing communism, they'll say, "Oh, and then there's Pol Pot," and it's like Pol Pot was backed by the United States to fight against the pro-Soviet communists, right? So there you go. All righty. Thoughts on Lenin's Tomb by David Remnick. I have not read that book. That's a famous book. And there was a blog. I think there's a blog or a website, like a communist blog called Lenin's Tomb as well. But I have not read Lenin's Tomb. It's about the fall of the Soviet Union. I haven't read it. So, I mean, if you just ask me, a random book, I can't say that I've read it. If I haven't read it, I haven't read it. So, there you go. I think putting Lenin in the mausoleum was a very strategic thing that Stalin did, right? And that the way that they kind of made Lenin the saint, like, almost like an icon in the Orthodox Church, was strategic, right? Stalin was a brilliant propagandist and a brilliant public relations guy, and he understood that they needed a new leader, and they needed to have a new kind of ideal figure to look up to, and that the way they put Lenin's body in the mausoleum was very strategic, and it was very effective, right? And the way they put Lenin up there, and many people commented that Stalin, that 20th century socialism is a weird synthesis because it pulls from the most advanced radical left-wing Jacobin ideas and the most semi-feudal primitive ideas, right? In Russia, you had the Bolsheviks that were these radical leftist, free sex, radicals from the wealthy classes. And then you had these very, very deeply conservative, traditional Russian peasants. And that Stalin merged them, right? And that the Soviet Union, as it came to existence in the 20th century, and what you can call 20th century socialism, really existing socialism, Stalinism, is very much, it is a synthesis. It has elements of radical advancing. Women are in the workplace. Women are becoming electrical engineers and generals in the army and carrying guns. Women have the right to divorce. Workers get to vote on aspects of what goes on in their factory. Science is being promoted everywhere. Industrializations, that's all very modern. But at the same time, traditional family. They promoted the Soviet family. Before there was the nuclear family in the United States, they had the Soviet family. And they had posters, they outlawed homosexuality. They outlawed abortion. They said the Soviet family is a working mother and a working father and at least 3 children, because they wanted to increase the population. And they started giving medals out to women who had more than 10 children. They became a mother of the Soviet Union, which was one of the highest medals you could get. If a woman had more than 10 kids, she got a medal. And that Stalin was working hard to increase the population. And that, the way they had Lenin with almost like a halo on his head, right? And the way Stalin was like the king. He was like, this king who went around motivating everyone to work hard and giving people medals for how hard they worked. There's elements of the feudal traditional culture, and there's elements of the radical Bolshevik stuff. It's a combination of the two, right? And that it worked, right? And that's not to say that's not bad. It worked, right? It worked, right? And it was very effective. The Russian peasantry would accept it. The deeply conservative Russian peasantry would accept it, but it had elements of the very radical and liberating ideas of the Bolsheviks too, like women's rights, like etc. So it was a combination of the two. right? So that's what you need to remember about Stalin, and that the worship of Lenin, the tomb of Lenin, and changing the ideology to Marxism, Leninism, and the role that Stalin played, that was all a new synthesis. And Stalin, it was genius. And honestly, Stalin doesn't get enough credit. Right? Stalin would always say, well, there's no such thing as a Stalinist. I took it all from Lenin. Well, no, you didn't. Lenin died. And after Lenin died, there was a lot of division. And Stalin was the guy who said, this is how we're going to do it. And what Stalin did worked. Didn't just work in the Soviet Union, worked in many different countries. It's a way of rapidly industrializing a country. Give women rights, build collective farms, which are not state farms. In a collective farm, they get paid for how much they produce. Right? And collective farms, they, that's a little different. In a state-run factory, you just get your wage, but in a collective farm, those farmers are working hard to sell their goods to the state. This is all the Soviet model, where you have state industry, you have collective farms, you have a leader who's very charismatic, who kind of goes around giving people rewards for how hard they work. This is all a very, very effective way of raising a country up and modernizing a country. And actually, many non-communists adopted. Libya basically did the same thing under Gaddafi. They just didn't call it that. They called it Islamic socialism. Iraq under Saddam Hussein, Syria under the Assad, under Bashar Assad, Iran. In the Islamic Revolution of Iran, they had a construction jihad, and they have 5-year economic plans. They have a huge amount of state ownership. State controls the major means of production. They have this thing called the Revolutionary Guards, which is kind of like the party, which is the biggest economic entity. It's like a military organization. If you look at it, many anti-imperialist and revolutionary movements are affected by what Stalin did. Stalin was a pioneer. No one had ever done this. Never before had you had a country that broke out of the Western capitalist imperialist system and was able to raise itself up out of poverty and become a superpower. Well, Stalin did it. And what he did, it worked very well in the 20th century, and it worked very well, right? The Soviet Union became an industrial superpower, wiped out illiteracy, universal housing, universal education, universal electrification, running water, biggest steel mills in the world, biggest power plants in the world, they did it, right? That, not an easy thing to do, and they pulled it off. And, the problem comes later. After you get over that first leap of industrialization, after you electrify the country, you wipe out illiteracy, then you start to have problems, right? And that's where you need the market for consumer goods, right? That system is not very good at producing clothing, children's toys, things like that. Fun stuff, not so good. It's good at making steel. It's good at making electricity. It's good at pumping oil out of the ground. It's good at paving roads. It's good at building modern housing units and replacing villages where there used to be huts. That's what that system is good at. The system starts to have problems when you get over that first stage, when people aren't starving anymore, when people have running water and electricity and housing and education, right? Then when people start to want to have fun, and they're like, okay, I've got my guaranteed job. I've got my guaranteed health care. I've got housing. There's no homelessness. There's no unemployment. But, we want to have some fun. That's where you start to have problems. And that's where you need the market, right? The government should not be designing children's toys. The government shouldn't be running hotels and restaurants. The government should not be designing games and, stuff like that. For the fun stuff, yeah, you need there to be a market incentive. You need people to be able to vote with their dollars and pick it. You need the person designing it to be working really, really hard to have the one that everyone wants to buy, right? But worker cooperatives where the employees get a share, that's a really good thing. And Huawei Technologies is a state-controlled cooperative in China. It's a for-profit company, but it's employee, and in China, they've built these state-controlled mega corporations that do things like that. Startup companies that do computers, toy companies, different things, right? They do these things, but they are part of the overall socialist central plan. And that is 20th century socialism. So there you go. All righty. Next question. Examples of business interests capturing science. What does that mean? Big pharma. I don't trust big pharma at all. right? And the fact that they are doing so much of the research, and that the Food and Drug Administration is not really accountable, and Big Pharma is a great example of that, where for-profit interests have a lot of control over the research that gets done, and that leads to the danger of the public. Big Pharma, I think that's the first example that comes to my mind of science being corrupted by business interests. Big Pharma. Ding, 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 ding. Big Pharma. I'll take Big Pharma for 1,000. I'll take Big Pharma for 1,000. For 1,000. All righty. All righty. Why did the Eastern establishment let JFK die? Because there were divisions in the Eastern establishment, Max, right? So this Max is asking, to give you all a little bit of background, there's been a fight in the ruling class, right? And the best account or description of that fight that I've ever read is called The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby. It argues that the military-industrial complex, which is the lower levels of capital, has fought against the intelligence agencies and the ultra-rich, and that the book argues that JFK was critical of the military-industrial complex, and he was opposing it, and that's why he was assassinated. And it also argues that Nixon was defending the military-industrial complex against the Eastern establishment, and that's why he was removed. I agree with that. However, an important thing you have to note, Max, is that there was a section of the Eastern establishment that thought Kennedy went too far. And the Bush family are a big part of it. The Bush family are part of the Eastern establishment, right? They are Connecticut, New England, old money. They're tied in with all those oil banking families, but they were very much against Bush. They were very much against Kennedy. And that, Kennedy, when he first came in, there were a lot of people that were supporting him. But then when he gave that speech about the USSR, and then when he wanted the moon mission to be a joint mission with a Soviet cosmonaut and an American astronaut, that the military-industrial complex opposed him from day one. They were calling him a communist, the John Birch Society and all of them. But as his presidency went on, as he got serious after the Cuban Missile Crisis, because the Cuban Missile Crisis was such a disaster that he saw how dangerous the military-industrial complex was, and he was ready to he wasn't going to listen to those guys at all. He had it out with the generals at the Cuban Missile Crisis. And after that, at that point, after Kennedy had it out with the generals, and, we didn't have nuclear war, we came very close with the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it de-escalated. At that point, Kennedy was saying he wasn't going to do anything the generals told him to do. And at that point, sections of the CIA turned against him. And it's pretty clear there was a fight going on within the agency at the time, because one of the things Kennedy was talking about doing was CIA reform. He basically thought that more conservative and militaristic elements had too much power in the CIA, and he was openly saying this, right? That liberal CIA kind of people liked Kennedy, but the Bush family certainly didn't like him. The Dulles brothers certainly didn't like him, and at that point, there was a big section of the CIA that gradually moved against him, right? The CIA does tend to be liberal. That is true. That's something people say that is true. My goodness. Sorry about that. Technical difficulties, just getting our camera in order here. There we go. And that is true. The CIA tends to be liberal, and the CIA tends to be that Eastern establishment. But at the same time, the CIA, the guys who started it weren't liberals. The Dulles brothers were not liberals. And that, the Bush family, Bush was CIA director for a long time. He ran, the U.S. Foreign Affairs Office in China. You go read the biography of Bush by Webster Tarpley. They ain't liberals either. The neocons are also a CIA creation, but they're a deviant wing, right? There's a certain wing of the CIA that is the conservative wing. Gina Haspel, the Bush family, Mike Pompeo, the neocon CIA. They're a layer in the CIA. I would argue they are not the majority. But they are the ones. They are a very big factor, right? So it's complicated, but the bulk of the CIA tend to be liberals just because of the nature of the work. However, because Republicans and conservatives have a lot of influence in the government, I would say that the influence of the neocons in the CIA, even though there's not as many of them, is very much inflated. You'll remember Valerie Plame. was a CIA, a high-ranking CIA person who, who criticized the torture or criticized the invasion of Iraq. And so Dick Cheney revealed and outed her as a CIA agent. And that was an attack on the CIA by the Bush administration. You'll remember that. Read about the Valerie Plame scandal that happened during the Bush years. I'll talk about that. I'll talk about the Valerie Plame scandal that happened in the Bush years. Look at that, right? That was clearly some interagency stuff, right? That was the Bush wing of the CIA, basically punishing dissidents within the CIA. There's weird stuff that goes on. The movie Zero Dark 30, for example. Take that movie, right? There's a movie called Zero Dark 30. This movie that came out, it's about how they killed bin Laden. In the film, it claims that the way that bin Laden was killed was by torture, that the CIA tortured somebody and that's how they got the information. Well, that's bullshit. And the CIA actually came out and said that didn't happen. That's weird as hell. Why would they make a Hollywood movie making it look like torture works when the CIA itself says, no, we didn't get bin Laden by torturing anybody? Something's going on there, right? And Gina Haspel, right? We know she was in favor of torture. She's known as the torture lady in the CIA. She's in favor of torture. And the CIA still tortures people. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they do, right? And they didn't stop, right? But they don't want to be known as torturers. The difference is, does the United States want the reputation of torturing people or not? Mike Pompeo, Gina Haspel, and the Bush family, they want people around the world to be scared of America and to believe they might be tortured if they get on America's bad side. Meanwhile, Barack Obama, John Brennan, Valerie Plame, people like that, they want America to be known as, Dudley Do-Right, who never would torture anybody because we're just so loving and kind and all of that. There are differences in how America should be perceived. Should America be perceived as scary and authoritarian and you better do what we say or else? Or should America be perceived as a nice, touchy-feely guy and everything that we do, we pretend, it just kind of happened. It just happened that way. We didn't make it happen, right? There's differences about how America should be perceived. Bush very much had no interest, and Bush, his whole family are in the CIA. Bush, Ronald Reagan, the neocons, they don't care how America is viewed. They don't care. Right? They don't care if people like the United States around the world, peace through strength. And the military-industrial complex thinks that also. But there's a wing of the CIA that thinks that way too. But the bulk of the CIA is a big public relations firm. Their job is to try and get people around the world to like America and try to promote American interests around the world. Right? I mean, one of the most interesting conversations, right? I mean, and it's really interesting when you think about intelligence stuff, right? I was talking to somebody and they told me the only time they've ever met an actual CIA person was when they were working with the Native American Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And they found out that somebody who was working there was a full-time CIA agent. And they were shocked. Well, if you think about it, actually, that makes a lot of sense, right? We have a museum in Washington, D.C. that is dedicated to Native Americans. And that museum is heavily infiltrated by the CIA. Now, why? Why is that? Well, think about it. What is the job of the CIA? The job of the CIA is to make everyone like the United States. What is one of the main things that people around the world don't like about the United States? We stole this country from the Native Americans, right? So, of course, you're going to have a museum built in Washington, D.C. to manage the narrative around that, to admit the bad things we did, but also insert different things. That's the kind of thing the CIA is going to be all over. Right? We're going to you have to admit we killed the Native Americans. You have to admit that. So we have to acknowledge that. So we're going to build a museum about it in Washington, D.C. And at that museum, we're going to manage the narrative. And you'll notice a lot of this goes on, right? Like the Oppenheimer movie that just came out, right? And Max is the one he was asking me about the Oppenheimer movie. Thought about it. It makes it look like the persecution of Oppenheimer was over a personal grudge, right? There was some guy in Congress he offended or something. That wasn't what it was about. Oppenheimer, who was the father of the atomic bomb, was a peace activist. And he was saying, look how dangerous it is. And the military-industrial complex and McCarthyism were so out of control that even the father of the atomic bomb got persecuted. That's what was going on there. But they made a Hollywood movie that makes it look like a personal grudge, managing the narrative. The same with during the Obama administration, they made a movie about the life of J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was the FBI director, and he viciously went after Martin Luther King Jr. He viciously went after the Black Panthers, COINTELPRO, etc. Awful person. Well, when you watch the Hollywood movie with Leonardo DiCaprio, you don't get the whole story. You don't understand the American government viciously went after the black people for fighting for their rights. You don't get the understanding that there was a whole government program going after all the kinds of progressive people. And that was because the communists were organizing for civil rights. The communists were leading the peace movement. You don't get that story. Instead, you learn that, J. Edgar Hoover had issues with his mom and was a cross-dresser and was gay, and that he just had this big ego. And they show him dictating the letter to Martin Luther King Jr., urging Martin Luther King Jr. to kill himself. And it's like he's having a fit of jealousy. He's just so jealous of Martin Luther King. That's not what the issue was. Okay. The issue was that black rights were being championed by the communists. Martin Luther King Jr. was fighting for black rights. And the FBI is the U.S. government. And their job is to track anyone who might be sympathetic. It was called the COINTELPRO. What does it stand for? Counterintelligence Program. They viewed the civil rights movement and the peace movement as being an expression of the KGB. They all thought it was a big conspiracy from Russia. And so they went after it, right? That's the story there. But instead, they made a movie where you learned it was about, J. Edgar Hoover being a cross-dresser or something. I think the CIA, again, they're managing the narrative. I remember when I was in college, I would tell people about COINTELPRO. And I remember I was sitting in college and I said, the U.S. government killed Fred Hampton. And this kid behind me goes, that's fact, in this like sarcastic voice. I would tell people the U.S. government, sent letters to Martin Luther King urging him to kill himself. People would say, that's crazy. That's bullshit. MLK has a national holiday. Everybody loved him. It's just, people don't want to acknowledge the truth. It's frustrating. It's very frustrating. All righty. What really happened in Finland during World War II? Well, you mean in the lead up to World War II. You're talking about the Winter War, right? 1939, the Soviet Union invaded Finland. The reason they invaded Finland is because they could see the Nazi threat coming. And they said to Finland, we would like to move our forces into Finland. And Finland said no. They said, we will give you just as much territory. They gave them like such a huge offer. And they said, no, they won't do it. So they had to fight the Nazis. The Nazis were coming. This was the period of the pact, the non-aggression pact, where they knew the Nazis were going right up to that line. And they said, okay, well, you know what? If you're not going to do it, we'll move in. And they moved their forces in because they saw the Nazi threat and they needed to be in position to prepare for a Nazi invasion. That's what that was about. Thank you, Victory Jin, for the super chat. Much appreciated. This system creates insecurities that don't allow us to create an actual movement. Those voices that tell you you can't and push you down. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And you need other people. You can't do this alone. We're building a movement here. That's what this stream is about. And we need to the numbers don't matter. Social media doesn't matter. That needs to be our attitude, right? We need to just forget social media because it's a trap. It's controlled and they are maniacal in what they do. We need to just pretend social media doesn't exist. That's what we have to do. We have to use social media as a means of interacting, and that's it. Because there's so much manipulation that goes on, and there's so much they're trying to control us. They're trying to control us. We have to just decide. We have to make a conscious effort to control our own minds and say, you know what? We're only going to consume CPI content. We're going to engage with this community constantly and remain engaged with this community. And on top of that, we're gonna just ignore social media numbers and all that because they really don't mean anything. At the end of the day, they don't really mean anything, right? And I'm learning that this week. I mean, weird stuff has gone on. I'm not going to go over the details, but look at the view counts of my recent videos. And this is silliness. Okay. I can just guarantee you this is silliness, right? Some videos do very well. Some videos don't do well. And something's going on. Okay. And, I mean, I suppose I can't prove it, but, there's foul play that goes on. We just have to just decide as a group, we don't care about this anymore. We care about building our organization. Someone joins here, someone joins there. Good. We'll take you. Glad to have more members. Glad to have more people watching and all of that. But we're done caring about numbers because the numbers are fake. The numbers are not real, and we're not going to be manipulated. We have to build a community of people who will rely on each other, who will support each other. That's what we have to do. And the social media, the numbers, the comments, all that's a distraction. All right. Since the day we are born, we are implanted with the idea that socialism is bad. It makes it hard to escape those ideas. Yeah, but socialism is common sense. People shouldn't be homeless because there are too many houses. People shouldn't be hungry because there is too much food, right? I mean, poverty should not be created by abundance. That's just deeply, deeply irrational. We need public ownership of the means of production. This is the CPI manual, the CPI education manual, right? And I wrote like the introduction or the opening essay. This is our manual, but there's a piece in here that I included, and it was written in 1897. It's on page 120 of the manual. It's by Edward Bellamy. It's called The Parable of the Water Tank. Go and read The Parable of the Water Tank. Right? That is one of the best explanations of what's wrong with capitalism I've ever heard. The Parable of the Water Tank. I don't have time to read it on here, but go and read it. I've read it on streams before. The Parable of the Water Tank. It explains exactly why capitalism is deeply irrational. And systems of the past, people were homeless because there wasn't enough food. Under capitalism, people were homeless because there was not enough housing. People are homeless because there's too much housing. People are hungry because there's too much food. Poverty is created by abundance, and that is the built-in problem of the capitalist system. Watched Mission to Moscow. Oh, yes, I've seen that. It's a great movie. It is an amazing movie. It's from the American diplomat who goes to the Soviet Union, and, it's about the Soviet Union in preparation for World War II and about the Moscow trials and Trotsky, and it's great. It's a great movie. Yeah, it's a really great movie. There's clip. I mean, it's really great. It's really and it starts out kind of dull, but it picks up speed. And it's a great movie. It's a World War II movie about the Soviet Union and how they're great allies of the United States against the Nazis. It's a great movie. Right. And it's pro-Stalin and anti-Trotsky. It's a great movie. Great movie. Go and watch Mission to Moscow. It's a great movie from Warner Brothers, 1943. It's based on the diaries of the U.S. Ambassador to the Soviet Union. It's a really good movie. I mean, it's just a really well-made movie, and it's exciting, and it's communist. And I will say it's a little bit, they're going out of their way to make the Soviet Union not look threatening. Right. And it's an old movie, so it's folksy, right? It's a little bit, folksy, right? At one point, I think the main character says, well, we know the Soviet Union's a good neighbor, but can we go hide in their storm cellar if there's a tornado? Stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that sounds like it's from The Wizard of Oz or something, right? You're on the list. All right. There we go. Can you explain Chinese communism? Are we against it? Why would we be against it, right? Socialism with Chinese characteristics has lifted millions of people out of poverty. It's, an economy where the banks and the factories and the industries are controlled by society. There's problems in China with corruption. There's inequality. China has its problems. But overall, Chinese communism is one of the greatest success stories for communism that we've ever seen. They say communism doesn't work. Communism builds the fastest trains in the world. Communism has the biggest telecommunications manufacturer in the world. Chinese communism And people want to tell you China's capitalist. And I just roll my eyes because it's the same people who say Obamacare is communism. They'll be like, oh, China's capitalist. It's like, really? The government controls the banks. The government controls the industries. Higher rate of state ownership than Venezuela. Massive state-run industries. They have a 5-year economic plan that comes out every year. They're run by a Marxist-Leninist party. Even the private companies are forced to operate in accordance with the central plan. So, yeah, this idea that, Chinese communism, it has its issues, but go and study it. Go and read the writings of Xi Jinping. Go and study Deng Xiaoping theory. Chinese communism is 20th century communism was the first stage, but we're now in a new stage. 21st century socialism involves a market sector, involves cooperatives, it involves elements of the market in order to raise living standards. We should study all of this, but we blindly follow none of it, right? We're going to develop a model that'll work right here, right? We're not ists. We're not Maoists. We're not Trotskyists. We're not Stalinists. We're not Hojists. We're not Castroists. We're socialists. And we're Americans. We're American patriots, and we want a better country. And we should study all of this, but blindly follow none of it. We should know it all very well. Go and study it. Go and study it and learn what you can from it. Take what you can. Take what you can learn, but don't chain yourself to it. Kids today are not learning about the Holocaust. I find that hard to believe. I mean, I know that the Holocaust is for little kids. It can be a little bit much, obviously. But, when I was in school, we read Night by Elie Wiesel. We did a whole big, long section on the Holocaust in 8th grade English class. And I was in my little conservative town. And, I think that they are. I mean, I find that hard to believe, Gabby. I mean, it may be possible. Is that because of political correctness? Is that because the teacher might say the wrong thing and get canceled, and so they're afraid to just talk about it at all, right? Because they're, one of your students tape records you and make it sound like you supported Hitler, even though you didn't say that. Is that what the issue is? I find that hard to believe. But one thing I will say, and I think this is a really big difference between red states and blue states. I grew up in a very conservative area in Ohio. And also, the area I grew up in was very German. A lot of Mennonites. My kindergarten teacher was Mrs. Hartman. My second grade teacher was Mrs. Wanger. My third grade, my first grade teacher was Mrs. Wanger. My second grade teacher was Mrs. Schumacher. Right. My fourth grade teacher was Mr. Hurst. My fifth grade teacher was Miss Hines. Right. My sixth grade teacher was Miss Pricing. Right. I had a lot of Germans. It was a very German area, a lot of blonde haired kids at my school. And it was Mennonites. Right. It was a very Mennonite area, a lot of Mennonites. And so we learned about Hitler and we learned about the Holocaust, and they never said Hitler was good and they never denied the Holocaust. But Nazism was an understandable mistake. That was kind of how we were taught. Well, Hitler was such a good speaker and the economy was so bad, and, the communists were rioting. And so obviously they did this awful thing. They did the Holocaust and they brought in Hitler. Right. That was the narrative that we got. And it was weird because here in New York City, that doesn't fly. Right. Here in New York City, a lot of Jewish folks, a lot of people from around the world. And if a teacher got up and talked that way, they'd lose their job in New York City. It's interesting. But yeah, the way we were taught was obviously Hitler was a mass murderer. Obviously the Holocaust happened. There was no Holocaust denial. There was no pro-Hitler statement. But there was this tap dance about, well, blah, there was this well, you got to understand that was the way they talked about Nazism, but not with communism. Right? Communism, we were taught, communism means everyone gets paid the same wage no matter how hard they work. And obviously, no one has any incentive to work then. So that's stupid. You have to be stupid to believe in communism. And it was just like, that was the attitude about communism. Right? There was no attempt to understand it. No attempt to, communism is stupid and it's anti-Christian. So whatever. But Nazism, on the other hand, we're going to go into this whole it's because I was in a German area. It's because I was in a conservative area. Here in New York City, It is very different. Here in New York City, because of the strength of the labor unions, because the history of the Communist Party here, you're going to learn that Nazism is just hate and bigotry. But you're going to learn that communism is bad. Communism failed everywhere it's ever been. But, communists were tied to the labor movement. Communists fought for women's rights. That communism is an understandable mistake. Right? And that's one of the major differences I've noticed between red state and blue state culture. In red states, the worst thing that you can be is a communist. In blue states, the worst thing that you can be is a Nazi. Right? Both red states and blue states in America are against communism and against Nazis. However, the question is, which one is a mistake that good people might make, and which one is just you have to be an idiot to do it and it's pure evil. In blue states, communism is a mistake that good people might make. Fascism is completely unforgivable. In red states, communism is completely unforgivable, and fascism is a mistake that good people might make. That's generally one of the big differences I've noticed, right? That is one of the big differences that I have noticed in America, right? And it's kind of muddled now because all the liberals think communism is fascism, and all the conservatives think fascism is communism. So it's all muddled and confused, right? Neither side claims communism or fascism as its own, but it's a matter of emphasis, I guess. There's still this belief that the American liberal system is the best or something, but there you go. All righty. There you go. They're calling this guy a Nazi-linked. I mean, he fought against the Soviet Union in World War II. That would put him on the Nazi side. That would put him on the Nazi side. All right. This person, Armenia's overthrew the prime minister 2018. I don't know enough about it. I just don't know enough about that. I listened to the UN meeting that they had. I understand what Russia's position is. I understand Armenia's position. I understand Azerbaijan's position, but I don't know the details of all of this. I can't comment, I don't intimately know the history of Azerbaijan and Armenia enough to comment on the territorial dispute that's going on, other than I know the imperialists want to destabilize that area, and that there are long-standing ethnic and religious and regional rivalries there, right? I mean, there are. And that when you study communist history, one of the problems with communist history is that often there's an attempt to cover it up. For example, Enver Hoxha, right? He's the leader of Albania, communist Albania, right? He has a book. Do I have it here? No. Well, he has a book, one of his books that he wrote. It's called With Stalin. And the book is all about how Albanians are not Slavs, because that's a really important part of the Albanian identity. And that Stalin originally wanted Yugoslavia and Albania to be the same country. And the whole book With Stalin is about the 4 times that Enver Hoxha met with Stalin. It describes in great detail what the meetings were like. But the focus of those meetings was on the fact that Albanians do not consider themselves Slavs. Well, this eventually turned into a political dispute. Yugoslavia drifted into the U.S. camp. It was one of the first communist countries to align with the United States. They were on the U.S. side of the Korean War, etc. Albania, they after Khrushchev denounced Stalin, they broke with the Soviet Union and defended Stalin, and they aligned with China, and they were one of the most hardline countries. Well, there is an ethnic component there. Yugoslavia and Albania have a history. So Albania did the exact opposite of whatever Yugoslavia did. And there's an ethnic, if you study the history there, it makes sense, right? Whatever Yugoslavia was doing, Albania was going to do the exact opposite. And there's a reason for this, and, Vietnam and China having a war. Again, there's a reason for this, right? And that if you just, I spent the bulk of my 20s studying communism in depth and learning Cold War history and the divides in the communist movement, studying Enver Hoxha and Mao and Stalin and Trotsky and all of this stuff. That stuff is just like one layer. But there's another layer beneath all this stuff, right? And that's, again, these streams, you know? I mean, that's why these streams are an acquired taste, right? We're talking with a huge amount of depth here, right? This is not kindergarten communism, right? And, you know, that makes it harder for some people to access it. Well, that's because we're building an organization of people that take this seriously and have this kind of depth, right? You know, I could dumb it down. I could bang my head against a wall a bunch of times and sound stupid, and then I might have thousands of viewers. But I'm not going to do that because I take this seriously, right? And even if the, you know, even if this, you know, and I try to do basic stuff and I try to assume my audience knows nothing and all of that, but we're still going to talk about this with depth. If people ask me about Trotsky's theory of permanent revolution, I'll explain it. I mean, we are going to talk about this with depth because I take this seriously. I'm not an amateur, right? And there you go. I would encourage you. There's so many great documentaries that RT has made on this topic, right? So many great films that RT has made. I would start with that. There's a book called People on Our Side by Edgar Snow. That's pretty good. There's a lot that's been published. I would recommend the book by Grover Furr, Blood Lies, which is, a history of it's a debunking of Dr. Timothy Snyder's book Bloodlands. I would recommend that as well. But there you go. So, can you recommend books on Soviet Central Asia? There's a book called Soviet but Not Russian. It's about the different the national minorities in the Soviet Union. I think I've got it here, and talks about the different nationalities. Do I have it here? It's called Soviet but Not Russian. And that book has a lot of good information about different nationalities. I don't think I have it here, but yeah, I recommend reading Soviet but Not Russian. That's a pretty good book. Soviet but Not Russian. So there you go. All righty, everybody. I think this is where our stream ends for tonight. I want to remind you all, this needs to be our focus, right? We need to do everything we can to make this a successful event. Make this a turning point against World War III, right? Zelensky's flop in his visit to the United States, that's one victory. Our organization, etc. This is all a big victory. Wasn't aware of that. I was not aware of that. That's interesting. Doesn't surprise me. But we need to do everything we can. Absolutely everything we can to build a strong anti-war conference in December in Portland. That's what we need to do. If you want to help us, send us a donation. That would help. But we mainly need you there. We need to fill up that auditorium. We need you to help promote. So this is important. This is our focus. And I want everyone to focus on it. Give it your heart. I'll talk more about this later, but I'm not a pure materialist, and I do believe that when people pull their strength and their focus together, thank you, Tyler, for turning me on to Wallace Wattles. I've been studying Wallace Wattles like you wouldn't believe. Tyler, go check out Wallace Wattles. I believe that our focus and our mental attention has a lot to do with the success that's coming up. I really, really do. So yeah, who's going to be there? Scott Ritter, Nick Brana, Jyoti Brar, among others. It's going to be great. So, all right, folks, I will put on the closing music. In the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.